The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as 9-year-old Princess Charlotte sat quietly in her favorite reading nook by the library window. She had always been different from her brothers, Prince George and Prince Louis. While they preferred playing football or video games, Charlotte found herself drawn to books about history, particularly stories about strong women who had changed the world. Her governess, Mrs. Henderson, had noticed this passion early on. "Your Royal Highness has quite the mind for learning," she would often say with a warm smile. "You ask questions that even university students struggle with." Charlotte would beam at such praise, but, lately, she had been feeling something she couldn't quite put into words. It was as if she was searching for something more, something that would help her understand her place in the world. The castle felt unusually quiet that Tuesday morning. Her father, Prince William, had left early for an official engagement in Scotland, and her mother, Catherine, was attending a charity event in London. Charlotte had grown accustomed to these periods of solitude, using them to explore the vast library that had become her sanctuary. As she turned the pages of a biography about Queen Elizabeth I, Charlotte heard the familiar sound of footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. These weren't the hurried steps of staff members or the measured pace of security guards. These footsteps carried a weight and dignity that could only belong to one person, her grandfather, King Charles III. Charlotte quickly placed a bookmark in her book and smoothed down her navy blue dress. Despite being family, protocol still mattered, and she had been taught from an early age to show proper respect to the monarch. However, King Charles had always encouraged his grandchildren to see him as both their grandfather and their king, a balance that sometimes confused Charlotte but which she was learning to navigate. "Good morning, Grandpa," she said softly as King Charles entered the library, his presence immediately filling the spacious room. He was dressed in his usual impeccable style, a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit with a burgundy tie that bore the subtle pattern of the royal crest. "Good morning, my dear Charlotte," King Charles replied, his voice carrying the warmth that was reserved for family moments. "I was hoping I might find you here. Mrs. Henderson mentioned you've been spending quite a lot of time with your books lately." Charlotte nodded, suddenly feeling shy. "I like learning about the women who came before us, Grandpa. About how they made a difference." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "Sometimes I wonder what difference I might make someday." King Charles studied his granddaughter's face, noting the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes and the thoughtful way she chose her words. At 9 years old, Charlotte already displayed a maturity that reminded him of his own mother at that age. Queen Elizabeth II had possessed that same combination of curiosity and determination, that same desire to understand her role in something larger than herself. "Walk with me, Charlotte," he said, extending his hand. "I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly that." They strolled through the castle's portrait gallery, where paintings of monarchs and royal family members from centuries past gazed down upon them with expressions of dignity and authority. Charlotte had walked this corridor countless times, but today she found herself looking at the portraits with new eyes, as if seeing them for the first time. "Do you know why I wanted to speak with you today?" King Charles asked as they paused before a portrait of Queen Victoria, a woman who had ruled the British Empire with an iron will and unwavering dedication. Charlotte shook her head, though something in her grandfather's tone suggested this wasn't just a casual family chat. There was something important happening, something that would change things in a way she didn't yet understand. "Charlotte, you've shown remarkable intelligence and compassion for someone so young," King Charles began, his hands clasped behind his back in the way Charlotte had seen him stand during official ceremonies. "Your teachers speak of your dedication to your studies, your kindness toward others, and your genuine interest in understanding the world around you. These are not common traits, even among members of our family." They continued walking, passing portraits of queens and princesses who had shaped British history through their actions, their choices, and their unwavering commitment to duty. Charlotte felt a strange flutter in her stomach, as if she was standing on the edge of something momentous. "Your great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, once told me that leadership isn't about the titles we hold or the crowns we wear," King Charles continued. "It's about the responsibility we feel toward others and our willingness to serve something greater than ourselves. She saw these qualities in you, Charlotte, even when you were just a baby." Charlotte stopped walking and looked up at her grandfather with wide eyes. "What do you mean, Grandpa?" King Charles knelt down so he could look directly into his granddaughter's face. "Before your great-grandmother passed away, she and I had many conversations about the future of our family and our monarchy. She believed strongly that the institution must evolve, that it must reflect the changing world we live in while maintaining the values and traditions that have served us well for over 1,000 years. The weight of his words settled over Charlotte like a warm blanket, comforting yet significant. She sensed that whatever her grandfather was about to tell her would change her life forever, though she couldn't yet imagine how. "One of the things your great-grandmother and I discussed was the importance of recognizing exceptional individuals within our family, regardless of their position in the line of succession," King Charles explained. "She believed that talent and dedication should be acknowledged and nurtured, especially when it appears in someone so young and promising." Charlotte's heart began to beat faster. She had always known she was fourth in line to the throne, behind her grandfather, her father, and her older brother George. It was a fact of her life that she had accepted without question, understanding that her role would likely be to support the monarchy rather than lead it. But something in her grandfather's words suggested that her understanding might be incomplete. "After much consideration and discussion with your parents, the Privy Council, and other senior members of our family," King Charles continued, "I have decided to bestow upon you a title that has never before been given to someone of your age. It is a title that comes with great honor, but also with great responsibility." The library, which had moments before felt familiar and comfortable, now seemed charged with anticipation. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she waited for her grandfather to continue. "Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, Princess of Wales, I am proud to name you the Duchess of Cambridge in your own right, with all the privileges and responsibilities that title entails. But, more importantly, I am creating for you an entirely new title, Princess Royal of the Future, which acknowledges not only your exceptional character but also your potential to lead our monarchy into a new era." The words hit Charlotte like a wave, washing over her with such force that she had to sit down on a nearby bench. A title that had never existed before. A recognition that went beyond traditional royal protocol. An acknowledgement that she, at 9 years old, was being prepared for something extraordinary. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space of the portrait gallery. "What does it mean?" King Charles sat beside her, his expression gentle but serious. "It means, my dear granddaughter, that you have been chosen to represent the future of our monarchy. It means that your education, your training, and your development will be guided not just by tradition, but by the needs of a rapidly changing world. It means that someday, you may be called upon to serve our nation and our people in ways we cannot yet imagine." Charlotte stared at her hands, trying to process what she had just heard. The books she loved reading suddenly seemed like preparation rather than simple entertainment. The questions she asked about history and leadership now felt like the beginning of a journey rather than mere curiosity. "Will I still be the same Charlotte?" she asked, looking up at her grandfather with concern. "Will I still be able to read my books and spend time with my brothers and learn about the things I love?" King Charles smiled, and, for a moment he looked less like a monarch and more like the grandfather who had taught her to garden and who always remembered her favorite biscuits during tea time. "You will always be Charlotte, my dear. This title doesn't change who you are, it simply recognizes who you have the potential to become. Your love of learning, your curiosity about the world, your compassion for others, these are exactly the qualities that make you perfect for this role." As they sat together in the portrait gallery, surrounded by the images of royals who had served before them, Charlotte felt a strange sense of peace settling over her initial shock. The flutter of nervousness in her stomach was still there, but it was joined by something else, a feeling of purpose that she had never experienced before. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," King Charles said, standing and offering his hand once again, "we begin preparing you for a future that will be unlike anything our family has experienced before. You will continue your regular education, but you will also begin special training in diplomacy, statecraft, and leadership. You will travel with me and with your parents to learn about our Commonwealth nations and our role in the global community. Most importantly, you will learn to balance the weight of responsibility with the joy of discovery." As they walked back toward the main part of the castle, Charlotte's mind raced with questions and possibilities. She thought about her favorite historical figures, Elizabeth I, who had navigated religious conflict and international politics with wisdom beyond her years, Victoria, who had overseen an empire while dealing with personal loss and family drama, and her own great-grandmother, who had served with dignity through decades of unprecedented change. "Grandpa," she said as they reached the grand staircase, "will people expect me to be perfect?" King Charles paused on the steps and turned to face her. "People will expect you to be human, Charlotte. They will expect you to make mistakes, to learn from them, and to grow stronger because of them. The most important thing you can do is remain true to yourself while understanding that your actions now carry a weight they didn't before." That evening, Charlotte sat in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked the same as she had that morning, the same brown hair, the same blue eyes, the same 9-year-old face that still carried traces of baby softness. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just Princess Charlotte, the spare to the spare. She was Princess Royal of the future, a title that carried expectations and opportunities she was only beginning to understand. Her lady's maid, Sarah, knocked softly on the door before entering with Charlotte's nightgown. "How are you feeling, Your Royal Highness?" she asked gently. Sarah had been with the family long enough to sense when something significant had occurred. "Different," Charlotte replied honestly. "Like I'm the same person, but also completely changed." Sarah smiled as she helped Charlotte prepare for bed. "That's often how it feels when we discover our true purpose, Your Royal Highness. It's not that we become someone new, it's that we finally understand who we were meant to be all along." As Charlotte lay in her bed that night, she thought about the books she had read, the questions she had asked, and the dreams she had harbored about making a difference in the world. For the first time, those dreams felt not like childish fantasies but like genuine possibilities. She thought about her parents' reaction when King Charles would tell them about her new title. She imagined their surprise, their pride, and perhaps their concern about the pressure this would place on their young daughter. She thought about her brothers and wondered how this would change their relationship, whether George would feel threatened or relieved that some of the pressure of future kingship might be shared. Most of all, she thought about the future that lay ahead of her. A future filled with responsibility and opportunity, with challenges and rewards, with the chance to serve something greater than herself while remaining true to the curious, compassionate girl she had always been. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new expectations, and new preparations for a role that had never existed before. But, tonight, Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, Princess of Wales, Duchess of Cambridge, and Princess Royal of the future, was simply a 9-year-old girl who loved books and learning, who cared deeply about others, and who had just discovered that sometimes, the most extraordinary destinies begin with the most ordinary moments. The moon cast silver light through her bedroom window as Charlotte finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of a future where she would help guide the monarchy through uncharted waters, where her love of learning would become a tool for understanding complex global issues, and where her compassion would help bridge divides between different cultures and communities. She dreamed of standing beside her grandfather at state ceremonies, of traveling to distant countries as a representative of the crown, of using her position to advocate for causes she believed in. But, most vividly, she dreamed of remaining true to herself while growing into the role that had been created especially for her, a role that honored both tradition and innovation, duty and personal growth, service and self-discovery. As sleep finally claimed her, Princess Charlotte smiled, knowing that her life had just taken a turn that would lead to adventures and opportunities beyond her wildest imagination. The news broke 3 days later with the force of a thunderclap across the British Isles and beyond. The official announcement from Buckingham Palace was carefully worded, as all royal communications were, but its significance was unmistakable to anyone who understood the intricate workings of the monarchy. His Majesty the King is pleased to announce the creation of a new title within the royal family. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana of Wales has been granted the title of Princess Royal of the Future, marking the first time in the history of the British monarchy that such a designation has been bestowed. This unprecedented honor recognizes Princess Charlotte's exceptional character, dedication to learning, and potential for future service to the Crown and Commonwealth. Within hours, the story had spread across every major news network, social media platform, and newspaper front page around the world. The reaction was immediate, intense, and deeply divided. At Windsor Castle, Charlotte found herself at the center of a storm she had never anticipated. The peaceful library where she had received her grandfather's announcement just days before was now off-limits, as security protocols had been dramatically increased. Camera crews gathered outside the castle gates, their telephoto lenses trained on any window where she might appear. The quiet life she had known was gone forever. "We need to discuss how to handle this," Prince William said to his wife Catherine as they sat in their private sitting room at Adelaide Cottage, their voices low despite the soundproof walls. They had returned immediately from their respective engagements when the palace informed them that the announcement had been moved up due to media leaks. Catherine paced the room, her usual composed demeanor cracked by the magnitude of what was happening. "She's 9 years old, William. 9. How do we explain to our daughter that half the world is celebrating her while the other half is questioning whether the monarchy has lost its mind?" Through the window, they could see Charlotte in the garden with her brothers, seemingly oblivious to the chaos swirling around her. She was teaching Prince Louis how to identify different types of birds, her patience and gentleness evident even from a distance. Prince George sat nearby, reading a book but occasionally glancing at his sister with an expression that mixed confusion with something that might have been concern. "She's stronger than we give her credit for," William said, though his voice carried the weight of a father's worry. "But you're right. We need to prepare her for what's coming. The attention will be unlike anything any royal child has experienced since my mother's death." The comparison to Princess Diana hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Both William and Catherine remembered the relentless media scrutiny that had followed Diana, the way cameras had invaded every aspect of her life, and the tragic consequences that followed. They had worked hard to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, carefully managing public appearances and fiercely protecting their privacy. Now, all of that was about to change. In London, the newsrooms were in overdrive. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for decades found themselves struggling to understand the implications of King Charles's decision. Constitutional experts were hauled onto television screens to explain what this new title might mean for the line of succession, for traditional royal protocols, and for the future of the monarchy itself. "It's absolutely unprecedented," Professor Margaret Harrison of Oxford University's Department of Constitutional Law explained to the BBC's main evening news program. "We're looking at a fundamental shift in how the royal family views its own evolution." The creation of a specific title recognizing future potential suggests that King Charles is preparing for changes to the monarchy that we haven't even imagined yet. The phone lines at Clarence House, the official residence of the Prince and Princess of Wales, rang constantly with interview requests, commentary opportunities, and questions that grew increasingly invasive. Media organizations from around the world wanted access to Charlotte, wanted to photograph her, wanted to capture her reaction to her new status. Inside the royal bubble, however, the focus was on something far more personal and immediate, helping a 9-year-old girl understand that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. "Charlotte," Catherine said gently as she knocked on her daughter's bedroom door that evening, "may I come in?" Your father and I would like to talk with you." Charlotte looked up from her desk, where she had been writing in a journal that had become her constant companion since her conversation with King Charles. The writing helped her process the swirling thoughts and emotions that had taken residence in her mind. "Is it about the newspapers?" Charlotte asked as her parents settled into the chairs by her window. She had caught glimpses of the headlines when Mrs. Henderson had tried to shield her from a news broadcast that morning. Words like revolutionary and controversial had stuck in her mind, though she wasn't entirely sure what they meant in the context of her new title. "Yes, sweetheart, it is," William said, his voice carrying the careful tone he used when discussing serious matters with his children. "The whole world is talking about what Grandpa announced, and that means people are going to be very interested in you. More interested than they've ever been before." Charlotte nodded slowly. She had noticed the increased security presence around the estate, the way staff members looked at her with a new kind of deference, and the hushed conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. "Are people angry about it?" Catherine reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Some people are surprised, darling. Some are excited. And, yes, some are questioning whether it was the right decision. That's what happens when something new and different occurs, people have strong feelings about it. But what matters most," William added, "is how you feel about it. This title, this responsibility, it's yours now. But you're still our daughter, still George and Louis's sister, still the same Charlotte who loves books and asks thoughtful questions about everything." Charlotte looked down at her journal, where she had been trying to write about the strange mix of excitement and terror that had settled in her chest. "I keep thinking about Queen Elizabeth I," she said quietly. "How she became queen when she was young and everyone doubted her because she was a woman and because her father had declared her illegitimate. But she proved them wrong." The sophistication of her reference surprised neither parent. Charlotte had always been drawn to historical parallels, always sought to understand current events through the lens of past experiences. It was one of the qualities that had convinced King Charles she was ready for this unprecedented responsibility. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that made Grandpa believe you could handle this," Catherine said with a smile. "You don't just react to things emotionally, you try to understand them, to learn from them, to see how they fit into the bigger picture of history." Over the following days, the family worked together to establish new routines and boundaries. Charlotte would continue her regular education, but additional tutors would be brought in to begin her specialized training in constitutional law, international relations, and diplomatic protocol. She would attend carefully selected public events with her parents, allowing the media to photograph her while maintaining strict limits on access and interaction. The most challenging aspect was explaining to George and Louis how their sister's new status might affect their own roles. At 11, George was old enough to understand the implications, though his reaction was more complex than anyone had anticipated. "Does this mean Charlotte might be queen instead of me someday?" he asked his father during a private conversation in William's study. "No, George," William replied carefully. "The line of succession hasn't changed. You're still the heir after me. But Charlotte's new title means she'll have special responsibilities to help prepare our family and our monarchy for the future. Think of it as her being trained to be your most trusted advisor and partner." George considered this for a moment, his young face serious with concentration. "Like how Uncle Harry was supposed to help you?" The question hit William with unexpected force, highlighting the parallels between Charlotte's new role and the partnership he had once envisioned with his younger brother. "In some ways, yes," he said honestly. "But, hopefully, Charlotte will be able to fulfill that role in ways that Uncle Harry couldn't." Meanwhile, 7-year-old Louis approached the situation with characteristic directness. "Will Charlotte still play football with us?" he asked Catherine during their evening walk around the estate. "Of course she will," Catherine assured him. "She's still your sister first, always." But, even as the family worked to maintain normalcy, the outside world continued to react with increasing intensity. Opinion polls showed the British public evenly divided on King Charles's decision. Younger generations largely supported the move, seeing it as a progressive step toward modernizing the monarchy. Older citizens expressed concerns about abandoning traditions that had served the country well for centuries. International reaction was equally mixed. Some Commonwealth nations praised the king for recognizing the changing role of women in leadership. Others worried about the precedent being set, questioning what other changes might be coming to the institution they had known for their entire lives. Religious leaders weighed in with their own perspectives. The Archbishop of Canterbury issued a statement supporting the decision, noting that Charlotte's character and dedication to service aligned perfectly with Christian values of humility and compassion. Other denominations expressed reservations about departing from established protocols. Political figures found themselves in the delicate position of commenting on a royal decision without appearing to interfere with constitutional monarchy. Prime Minister responses were carefully crafted to express support while maintaining appropriate distance. Opposition leaders struggled to find criticism that wouldn't appear unpatriotic or sexist. Through it all, Charlotte maintained her daily routines as much as possible. She continued her regular lessons with Mrs. Henderson, though new subjects were gradually added to her curriculum. A professor of international relations from Cambridge University began visiting twice weekly to introduce her to basic concepts of diplomacy and global politics. A retired ambassador started teaching her about Commonwealth nations and their unique relationships with Britain. The most significant change was in Charlotte's relationship with her grandfather. What had once been occasional visits and family gatherings became regular working sessions. King Charles began including her in selected meetings with his advisors, allowing her to observe how decisions were made at the highest levels of government. The key to effective leadership, he told her during one of their walks through the gardens at Highgrove, is listening more than you speak, especially in the beginning. Watch how people interact, how they present their ideas, how they respond to questions. You'll learn more from observing than you will from any textbook. Charlotte absorbed these lessons with the same intensity she brought to her academic studies. She began keeping detailed notes about everything she observed, creating her own reference guide for future use. Her journal entries became longer and more sophisticated as she grappled with complex ideas about leadership, responsibility, and service. The media attention, meanwhile, showed no signs of diminishing. Photographers with long lenses positioned themselves at every possible vantage point around the royal residences. Entertainment magazines offered substantial sums for any photograph or information about Charlotte's daily life. Social media buzzed with speculation about her education, her interests, her personality, and her future. "We need to give them something," the palace press secretary advised during a strategy meeting. The appetite for information about Princess Charlotte is insatiable. If we don't provide controlled access, they'll seek unauthorized information, which could be far more problematic. The solution came in the form of a carefully orchestrated photo session and brief interview. Charlotte would appear with her parents in the garden at Windsor Castle, answer a few pre-approved questions about her education and interests, and pose for official portraits that could be distributed to media outlets worldwide. The session was scheduled for a crisp autumn morning when the gardens were at their most beautiful. Charlotte wore a navy blue dress with a subtle tartan pattern, a nod to her Scottish heritage that had been carefully chosen by Catherine and the palace-style advisors. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style that emphasized her natural beauty while maintaining the dignity expected of her new position. "How do you feel about your new title, Your Royal Highness?" asked the BBC's royal correspondent, the first question in what would be a 15-minute interview that would be dissected and analyzed around the world. Charlotte looked directly into the camera with a composure that belied her 9 years. "I feel honored and grateful that my grandfather has shown such confidence in me," she said in a clear, steady voice. "But I also understand that this is just the beginning. I have a lot to learn, and I'm excited about that learning process." The interview continued with questions about her education, her hobbies, and her thoughts about the future. Charlotte's responses were thoughtful and articulate, though occasionally her youth showed through in the way she smiled or gestured. The combination of maturity and childlike authenticity created exactly the impression the palace had hoped for, a young person who was serious about her responsibilities but still very much a child. When the interview concluded and the photographers had taken their final shots, Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and accomplishment. She had successfully navigated her first major media appearance, but, more importantly, she had begun to understand how her private self could coexist with her public role. That evening, as she reviewed the day with her parents, Charlotte asked a question that surprised them with its sophistication. How do we know if we're being authentic while still fulfilling our public responsibilities? It was a question that spoke to the heart of royal existence, the constant balance between personal truth and public duty that every member of the family struggled with throughout their lives. William and Catherine exchanged glances, recognizing that their daughter was already grappling with concepts that had taken them years to understand. "That's one of the most important questions you'll spend your whole life answering," Catherine said gently. "And the fact that you're asking it now tells me you're going to find your way through it successfully." As Charlotte prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the extraordinary week that had transformed her from a relatively private royal child into one of the most talked-about young people in the world. The attention was overwhelming at times, but beneath it all was a growing sense of purpose that felt both exciting and right. She thought about the historical figures she admired, the women who had faced similar challenges in their own times. Elizabeth I had been declared illegitimate before becoming one of England's greatest monarchs. Victoria had been underestimated because of her youth before ruling over an empire. Her own great-grandmother had been a young woman when World War II tested her resolve and character. Now it was Charlotte's turn to step into a role that had never existed before, to help guide an ancient institution through modern challenges while remaining true to herself and her values. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that she had the support of her family, the wisdom of her grandfather, and her own determination to serve with honor and authenticity. The world was watching, waiting to see what Princess Royal of the future would do with the unprecedented opportunity she had been given. Charlotte was ready to show them. 6 months had passed since Charlotte's life-changing announcement, and the initial media frenzy had settled into a steady stream of public interest that followed her every move. The young princess had adapted to her new reality with a grace that impressed even the most seasoned royal watchers, but the real test of her character came on a cold February morning when she faced her first major public challenge. The crisis began innocuously enough. Charlotte was attending a Commonwealth education conference with her grandfather, sitting quietly in the back row while education ministers from 37 nations discussed funding shortages and resource allocation. It was meant to be a learning experience for her, an opportunity to observe international diplomacy in action without any pressure to participate. However, when the Minister of Education from a small Caribbean nation raised concerns about outdated textbooks and inadequate technology in their schools, something stirred within Charlotte. She had been reading about educational inequality as part of her expanded curriculum, and the statistics she had memorized suddenly became human faces and real struggles in her mind. Dr. Patricia Williams from Jamaica was explaining how her nation's children were learning about science from textbooks that predated the internet, how bright young minds were being stifled by lack of access to modern learning tools. As she spoke, Charlotte noticed her grandfather taking careful notes, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Your Majesty," Dr. Williams said, addressing King Charles directly, "we understand that resources are limited everywhere, but our children deserve the same opportunities as those in more prosperous Commonwealth nations. We're asking not for charity, but for partnership in building a better future." The room fell silent as delegates considered her words. Charlotte could feel the weight of unspoken political considerations, the delicate balance between available resources and diplomatic relationships that made such decisions complex. But, in that moment, she saw something simpler: children who needed help, and adults who had the power to provide it. Before anyone could respond to Dr. Williams, Charlotte stood up from her seat in the back row. The movement was so unexpected that several delegates turned to see what was happening. King Charles looked at his granddaughter with surprise, then gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Excuse me," Charlotte said, her young voice carrying clearly across the conference room. "May I ask a question?" The room erupted in whispers as delegates realized that the 9-year-old Princess Royal of the future was about to speak publicly for the first time in an official setting. Dr. Williams smiled warmly and nodded her approval. "Dr. Williams," Charlotte continued, walking slowly toward the front of the room with the poise her tutors had spent months helping her develop, "you mentioned that your students are using science textbooks that are outdated. I've been learning about how quickly scientific knowledge advances, especially in fields like renewable energy and marine conservation. May I ask what subjects your students are most interested in learning about?" The question surprised everyone in the room, including Dr. Williams herself. Most political figures would have focused on funding mechanisms or implementation timelines. Charlotte had cut straight to the heart of the matter. What did the children actually want to learn? "Well, Your Royal Highness," Dr. Williams replied, her voice warming with genuine enthusiasm, "our young people are incredibly interested in marine biology and environmental science. Living on an island nation, they see the effects of climate change every day. They want to understand coral bleaching, sea level rise, and renewable energy solutions. But our textbooks barely mention these topics." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "And what about technology access? Do your schools have internet connectivity?" "Some do, but it's unreliable, and many schools have only 1 or 2 computers for hundreds of students." As Charlotte asked her questions, something remarkable happened in the room. The formal atmosphere of diplomatic protocol gave way to genuine engagement with the issues at hand. Other delegates began asking follow-up questions, sharing their own challenges, and offering potential solutions. King Charles watched his granddaughter with growing admiration. Without any formal training in parliamentary procedure or diplomatic protocol, she had managed to transform a stiff policy discussion into a collaborative problem-solving session. More importantly, she had given voice to the very children who would be affected by whatever decisions were made in that room. "Dr. Williams," Charlotte said after several minutes of discussion, "what if there was a way to connect your students directly with young people in other Commonwealth nations who are studying the same subjects? What if they could share research projects and learn from each other through video calls and online collaboration?" The suggestion sparked immediate interest among several delegates. The Minister of Education from New Zealand mentioned a successful program connecting rural schools with urban universities. The representative from Canada discussed digital libraries that could provide access to current research and interactive learning materials. "Your Royal Highness has identified something crucial," said Professor James Mitchell from the University of Edinburgh, who was attending as an education policy advisor. "We often focus on providing resources to schools, but we rarely consider how students themselves could become resources for each other across international boundaries." What followed was the most productive session the Commonwealth Education Conference had experienced in years. Delegates began drafting preliminary agreements for student exchange programs, shared digital resources, and collaborative research projects. Dr. Williams found herself at the center of a support network that promised real improvements for her students within months rather than years. But the most significant moment came when Charlotte addressed the room one final time before the session concluded. "I know I'm just 9 years old," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the audience, "and I know I have a lot to learn about how governments work and how decisions get made. But I also know what it feels like to be curious about the world and excited about learning. If we can help children in different countries become friends and study partners, maybe they'll grow up understanding each other better than we do now." The simplicity and wisdom of her observation left the room silent for several long moments. Here was a child who had identified one of the fundamental challenges facing the modern world: how to build understanding and cooperation across cultural and national boundaries, and she had suggested a solution that was both practical and profound. When the session ended, delegates approached Charlotte with a mixture of admiration and amazement. Several asked for her thoughts on specific educational initiatives in their own countries. Others requested permission to quote her comments in their reports to their respective governments. Dr. Williams was particularly moved by the encounter. "Your Royal Highness," she said as she prepared to leave, "you've given our children something more valuable than textbooks or computers. You've given them hope that someone their age understands what they're going through and believes in their potential." The drive back to Windsor Castle was quiet at first, as Charlotte processed what had just occurred. She had spoken publicly about issues she cared about, and people had listened. More importantly, her words had led to concrete actions that would benefit children she would probably never meet but whose struggles she now understood in a personal way. "How do you feel about what happened today?" King Charles asked as their car moved through the London traffic. "Nervous," Charlotte replied honestly. "But also excited. I think I understand now why you created this title for me. It's not really about me at all, is it? It's about using whatever platform I have to help other people, especially young people who don't have the same opportunities one do." King Charles smiled with pride and relief. His granddaughter had just demonstrated that his decision to create the title of Princess Royal of the future had been justified. She understood instinctively that royal privilege came with royal responsibility, and she was prepared to embrace both. The media reaction to Charlotte's spontaneous intervention was swift and overwhelmingly positive. News outlets that had been skeptical about her appointment now praised her natural diplomacy and genuine concern for global issues. Social media exploded with praise for the young princess who had spoken up for children around the world. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the conference, Charlotte received a video message from a group of students at a primary school in Jamaica. Dr. Williams had shared Charlotte's comments with her students, and they had worked together to create a presentation about their island's marine ecosystem and the challenges they faced from climate change. "Dear Princess Charlotte," said a 10-year-old girl named Amelia who served as the group's spokesperson, "thank you for asking about what we want to learn. We made this video to show you our coral reef and to tell you about our ideas for protecting it. We hope we can be study partners with children in England and learn from each other." The video continued with other students sharing their observations about sea level rise, their experiments with solar energy, and their dreams of becoming marine biologists and environmental scientists. Their enthusiasm and intelligence shone through despite the basic equipment they were using to record their presentation. Charlotte watched the video 3 times, taking notes on the students' questions and ideas. She immediately asked her tutors to help her research coral reef conservation and renewable energy technologies. More importantly, she began planning a response that would create the kind of international student partnership she had envisioned during the conference. Working with her private secretary and education advisors, Charlotte developed a proposal for what she called the Commonwealth Young Scholars Network. The program would connect students aged 8 to 18 across Commonwealth nations through online platforms, allowing them to collaborate on research projects, share cultural experiences, and develop friendships that transcended national boundaries. The proposal was more sophisticated than anyone expected from a 9-year-old, but Charlotte had learned to leverage the expertise of the adults around her while maintaining her own vision and voice. She understood that her ideas needed to be translated into practical policies and funding mechanisms, but she also insisted that the student perspective remain central to every aspect of the program's development. When she presented the proposal to her parents and grandfather 2 weeks later, the document included detailed sections on technology requirements, curriculum integration, teacher training, and assessment methods. Charlotte had worked with experts in each area, but her own insights and priorities were evident throughout. "This is remarkable work, Charlotte," her father said as he reviewed the proposal. "But are you prepared for the level of responsibility this would entail?" If this program moves forward, you'll be expected to oversee its implementation and serve as its primary advocate. Charlotte considered the question seriously. She understood that accepting this responsibility would mean less privacy, more public scrutiny, and constant pressure to prove that the program was successful. But she also knew that the alternative was allowing bright, eager students like those in Dr. Williams's school to continue learning from outdated materials while their potential went unrealized. I think, she said slowly, that if I'm not prepared for this kind of responsibility now, I never will be. And, if this program helps even one student discover something they're passionate about, it will be worth whatever challenges come with it. Her answer convinced even the most cautious advisors that Charlotte was ready for this next phase of her role as Princess Royal of the future. Within 6 months, the Commonwealth Young Scholars Network was officially launched with Charlotte as its founding patron and primary spokesperson. The launch event took place at the Royal Institution in London, where Charlotte delivered her first major public address to an audience of educators, diplomats, and young people from across the Commonwealth. The speech, which she had written herself with guidance from her tutors, captured both her youthful enthusiasm and her growing understanding of global interconnectedness. Education isn't just about learning facts from textbooks, she told the audience. It's about discovering how the world works, understanding how we're all connected, and developing the skills and knowledge we need to solve the challenges facing our generation. When young people in different countries work together on the same problems, they're not just learning science or history or literature, they're learning how to build a better future together. The response was overwhelming. Within the first month of the program's launch, over 500 schools from 31 Commonwealth nations had applied to participate. Students began collaborating on projects ranging from climate change research to cultural exchange programs. Teachers reported increased engagement and enthusiasm as their students connected with peers from different countries and backgrounds. For Charlotte, the success of the program validated her belief that young people could be powerful forces for positive change when given the right opportunities and support. She began receiving letters and videos from participating students, sharing their discoveries and thanking her for creating connections they had never imagined possible. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Amelia, the Jamaican student who had first inspired Charlotte's commitment to international education cooperation. In a video call arranged through the program, Amelia shared her latest research on coral restoration techniques and announced her intention to study marine biology at university. "Thank you, Princess Charlotte," Amelia said during their conversation, "for showing me that my dreams aren't too big and that there are people around the world who believe in the same things I do." As Charlotte listened to Amelia's plans and aspirations, she realized that her role as Princess Royal of the future was evolving in ways she had never anticipated. She wasn't just preparing for some distant future responsibility, she was actively shaping the present, creating opportunities and connections that would influence global education for years to come. That evening, as she wrote in her journal about the day's events, Charlotte reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning in the Windsor Castle Library when her grandfather had first spoken to her about her new title. She was no longer the same 9-year-old girl who had wondered what difference she might make in the world. She was discovering that the difference was already being made, one conversation, one connection, one collaborative project at a time. The first major crisis of Charlotte's new role came on a rainy Thursday morning in October, exactly 1 year after her grandfather had bestowed upon her the unprecedented title. She was now 10 years old, more confident in her public duties, and deeply committed to the Commonwealth Young Scholars Network that had become her primary focus. But nothing in her careful training had prepared her for the phone call that would test everything she had learned about leadership, responsibility, and grace under pressure. Charlotte was reviewing applications from schools wanting to join the Young Scholars Network when her private secretary, Miss Eleanor Davies, knocked urgently on the door of her study at Kensington Palace. The expression on Miss Davies's face immediately told Charlotte that something serious had occurred. "Your Royal Highness," Miss Davies said, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of concern, there's been an incident at one of the participating schools in the Young Scholars Network. We need to discuss this immediately." Charlotte set down her pen and gave Miss Davies her full attention. Over the past year, she had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated the difference between minor administrative issues and genuine crises. The tension in Miss Davies's shoulders and the careful way she chose her words suggested this was definitely the latter. "What kind of incident?" Charlotte asked, though something in her stomach already knew the answer would be difficult to hear. "There's been a serious cyberbullying situation involving students from 3 different Commonwealth nations who were connected through one of your collaborative projects," Miss Davies explained, settling into the chair across from Charlotte's desk. "A student in South Africa shared some personal information during a video call, and students from 2 other countries used that information to create cruel social media posts that have now spread far beyond the original participants." Charlotte felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. The Young Scholars Network was her proudest achievement, her proof that young people could connect across cultures and borders to create positive change. The thought that the platform she had championed was being used to hurt rather than help felt like a personal betrayal of everything she believed in. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. The targeted student, a 12-year-old girl named Nalani from Cape Town, has been receiving threatening messages for 3 days. Her parents have contacted both the school and the media. Several news outlets are already asking whether the incident represents a fundamental flaw in the program's design and whether adequate safeguards were put in place. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the full implications of what she was hearing. This wasn't just about one student being hurt, though that was certainly the most important aspect. This was about the credibility of a program that bore her name, that she had personally advocated for, and that thousands of students were now participating in. If the public lost confidence in the Young Scholars Network's safety and effectiveness, all of those connections and opportunities could disappear. "I need to speak with Nalani and her family immediately," Charlotte said, her mind already racing through the steps that needed to be taken. "And I need to understand exactly what went wrong with our monitoring systems." Miss Davies nodded approvingly. "I've already reached out to the family through appropriate diplomatic channels, and they've agreed to a video call this afternoon. I should warn you, however, that there will likely be significant media attention around your response to this situation. There are already questions being raised about whether someone of your age should be overseeing programs involving vulnerable children." The criticism stung, but Charlotte had learned to expect skepticism about her role. What mattered now was not defending her position but ensuring that Nalani received the support she needed and that similar incidents could be prevented in the future. "Set up the call with Nalani's family," Charlotte instructed. "And please arrange meetings with our technology advisors and safeguarding experts. I want to understand every aspect of how this happened and what we can do to prevent it from happening again." The afternoon call with Nalani and her parents was one of the most difficult conversations Charlotte had ever experienced. Nalani was a bright, articulate girl who had been excited about connecting with students from other countries through the Young Scholars Network. She had shared information about her family's financial struggles during what she thought was a private discussion with study partners about economic inequality as a research topic. "I trusted them," Nalani said, her voice small but steady as she spoke to Charlotte through the video connection. "They seemed like they really wanted to understand what life was like here, so I told them about how my mother cleans offices at night to pay for my school fees. I thought we were friends." Charlotte felt her heart break as she listened to Nalani's story. The girl had done exactly what the Young Scholars Network was designed to encourage. She had shared her authentic experience with peers from different backgrounds, opening herself up to build genuine understanding across cultural boundaries. Instead of finding friendship and support, she had been mocked and threatened by students who had turned her vulnerability into entertainment. "Nalani," Charlotte said, choosing her words carefully, "what happened to you was completely wrong, and I am so sorry that our program failed to protect you. You did nothing wrong by sharing your story and trying to build connections with other students. The fault lies with the students who betrayed your trust and with our systems that didn't prevent them from doing so. Nalani's mother, Mrs. Kumalo, spoke next. Princess Charlotte, we appreciate your concern, and we know you meant well with this program. But our daughter has been humiliated in front of students around the world, and now she's afraid to participate in any international activities. How do we rebuild her confidence? How do we help her trust again? It was a question Charlotte couldn't answer immediately, but she knew she had to try. Mrs. Kumalo, I understand your daughter's reluctance to trust, and I understand your concerns about the program. But I also believe that giving up on international connection would be letting the bullies win. Instead, I'd like to work with you and Nalani to rebuild the program in a way that protects students while still allowing them to form meaningful relationships. Over the following weeks, Charlotte immersed herself in understanding every aspect of what had gone wrong with the Young Scholars Network's safeguarding systems. She worked with cybersecurity experts, child protection specialists, and educational technology researchers to identify the weaknesses that had allowed the cyberbullying to occur. The investigation revealed several critical flaws in the program's design. Students had been given too much freedom to share personal information without adequate supervision. The monitoring systems for online interactions had been insufficient to catch harmful behavior before it escalated. Most importantly, there had been no clear protocols for responding to incidents when they occurred. Charlotte also insisted on speaking directly with the students who had engaged in the bullying behavior. These conversations, conducted with parents and school officials present, were perhaps the most challenging aspect of her response to the crisis. I don't understand why you thought it was acceptable to mock Nalani for her family's financial situation, Charlotte told a group of 4 students from different countries during a video conference that had taken weeks to arrange. She shared that information because she trusted you and wanted to help you understand her perspective. How did that trust become something you felt entitled to betray? The responses varied from genuine remorse to defensive justification, but Charlotte listened to each student with the same careful attention she had shown to Nalani. She was beginning to understand that effective leadership required engaging with people who had made harmful choices, not just supporting those who had been harmed. Your actions didn't just hurt Nalani, Charlotte continued. They threatened the safety and trust that thousands of other students depend on in this program. You have a responsibility to help repair that damage, not just to apologize for what you did wrong. Working with school administrators and parents, Charlotte developed a restorative justice approach that required the students involved in the bullying to take active steps to rebuild trust within the Young Scholars Network. They would create and present educational materials about cyberbullying prevention, participate in expanded cultural sensitivity training, and engage in supervised mentoring relationships with younger students. But Charlotte's most significant response to the crisis was a complete overhaul of the Young Scholars Network's safeguarding systems. Working with experts from leading universities and technology companies, she developed new protocols that balanced student freedom with protection from harm. The revised program included mandatory training for all participants on digital citizenship and cultural sensitivity. Online interactions were monitored by specially trained staff who could intervene before harmful behavior escalated. Most importantly, clear reporting mechanisms were established that would allow students to seek help immediately if they experienced bullying or harassment. We're not just fixing the problems that allowed Nalani to be hurt, Charlotte explained to the board of advisors overseeing the program. We're creating a model for how international educational programs can protect all students while still allowing them to form meaningful connections. The most crucial test of Charlotte's leadership came when she had to decide whether to continue with the Young Scholars Network despite the intense criticism it was receiving. Several advisors suggested suspending the program until the safeguarding issues could be fully resolved. Media commentators questioned whether a 10-year-old should be overseeing any program involving vulnerable children. The pressure was immense, and Charlotte spent several sleepless nights weighing the options. She could protect her own reputation by stepping back from the program, allowing adult administrators to take over completely. Or she could accept full responsibility for the failures that had occurred and commit to rebuilding the program stronger than before. The decision came to her during another video call with Nalani, 6 weeks after their first conversation. The South African student had been working with her school counselor and had expressed interest in helping to improve the Young Scholars Network's safeguarding protocols. Princess Charlotte, Nalani said, I know what happened to me was terrible, and I know some people think the program should be stopped because of it. But I've been thinking about all the other students who have had positive experiences through the network. Should they lose those opportunities because of what a few people did to me? Nalani's question crystallized everything Charlotte had been struggling with. The young girl who had been most harmed by the program's failures was advocating for its continuation, recognizing that the potential for positive impact outweighed the risks if proper safeguards were put in place. What would help you feel safe participating again? Charlotte asked. I want to know that if something like this happens to another student, there are people ready to help immediately, Nalani replied. I want to know that students who bully others face real consequences. And I want to be part of making sure the program works better for everyone. Charlotte made her decision that afternoon. The Young Scholars Network would continue, but with Nalani as a special advisor to help ensure that student voices were central to all safeguarding decisions. The program would become a model for how educational initiatives could learn from their failures and emerge stronger. The announcement of the program's continuation, along with the comprehensive safeguarding improvements, received cautious support from most observers. More importantly for Charlotte, it received enthusiastic endorsement from participating students around the world, many of whom had been worried that the actions of a few bullies would destroy the connections they had worked hard to build. 3 months later, Charlotte stood before the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization in Paris, delivering a speech about child protection in international educational programs. At 10 years old, she was the youngest person ever to address the organization on policy matters, but her experiences with the Young Scholars Network crisis had given her insights that impressed even seasoned diplomats. We cannot protect children by preventing them from connecting with peers from different cultures, she told the assembled delegates. But we can protect them by creating systems that respond quickly to harm, by educating all participants about respect and responsibility, and by ensuring that young people themselves have voices in designing the programs that affect them. The speech, and the comprehensive safeguarding framework she presented alongside it, established Charlotte as a global advocate for child protection in digital educational environments. Universities began consulting her program's protocols when designing their own international initiatives. Technology companies sought her input on developing safer platforms for young users. But the most meaningful recognition came from Nalani herself, who had become a close friend and collaborator despite the thousands of miles separating them. In a letter that arrived just before Charlotte's 11th birthday, Nalani wrote about how the experience had changed her perspective on leadership and resilience. You could have given up when things got difficult, Nalani wrote. You could have blamed other people for the problems or pretended they weren't serious. Instead, you faced the problems directly and worked to solve them. That's the kind of leader I want to be someday, and it's the kind of leader the world needs. As Charlotte read Nalani's letter in her study at Windsor Castle, she reflected on how much she had learned during the crisis. She had discovered that true leadership wasn't about avoiding failures but about responding to them with integrity and determination. She had learned that protecting people sometimes meant accepting difficult criticism and that the most important voices in any conversation were often those of the people most affected by the outcomes. Most importantly, she had learned that the title of Princess Royal of the future wasn't just about preparing for someday responsibilities. It was about accepting responsibility in the present moment, even when that responsibility felt overwhelming for someone her age. The crisis had tested Charlotte in ways she couldn't have anticipated, but it had also proven that King Charles's faith in her character had been justified. She was indeed ready to help guide the monarchy and the Commonwealth toward a future that honored both tradition and innovation, duty and compassion, service and authenticity. As she prepared for bed that night, Charlotte looked forward to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, knowing that she had the strength, wisdom, and support to meet them with grace and effectiveness. 2 years had passed since the cyberbullying crisis that had tested Charlotte's resolve and leadership capabilities. Now 12 years old, she had grown into her role as Princess Royal of the future with a confidence and wisdom that impressed observers around the world. The Commonwealth Young Scholars Network had become a model program for international education, and Charlotte herself had emerged as a respected voice on issues affecting young people globally. But, on a crisp morning in November, as autumn painted the Windsor Castle grounds in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Charlotte faced a different kind of challenge entirely. This one came not from external critics or program failures, but from within her own family, specifically from her older brother George, who at 13 was beginning to grapple seriously with his own future as the eventual heir to the throne. The conversation that would define their relationship for years to come began innocuously enough, during what had become a weekly tradition of sibling breakfast meetings in Charlotte's private sitting room. These gatherings had started as a way for the three Wales children to maintain their close bonds despite their increasingly different schedules and responsibilities. George had his own intensive preparation for his future role as king, Charlotte had her expanding duties as Princess Royal of the future, and even 9-year-old Louis was beginning to take on more public engagements. "I've been thinking," George said as he stirred honey into his tea, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic heaviness that immediately caught Charlotte's attention. "About what happens when I become king someday." Charlotte looked up from the briefing papers she had been reviewing, updates from Young Scholars Network coordinators in 12 different countries. "What about it?" she asked gently, sensing that her brother was working towards something significant. "Well," George continued, setting down his teaspoon with deliberate care, "I've been reading about historical monarchs who had advisors and partners they could trust completely. Like Elizabeth I had William Cecil, or Victoria had Prince Albert. People who could help them make difficult decisions and who they knew would always tell them the truth." Louis, who had been quietly eating his breakfast while reading a book about marine biology, looked up with interest. Despite being the youngest, he had developed an uncanny ability to sense when his siblings were having important conversations. "And?" Charlotte prompted, though she was beginning to understand where George's thoughts were leading. "And, I've been wondering," George said, meeting his sister's eyes directly, "whether you would consider being that person for me. Not just as my sister, but as my closest advisor when I eventually become king. Would you consider being my Princess Royal?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond their family relationship. Charlotte felt her breath catch as she realized what George was proposing, not just a continuation of their current partnership, but a formal role that would reshape both of their futures and, potentially, the monarchy itself. "George," she said slowly, "I already am Princess Royal. Grandpa created the title Princess Royal of the future specifically for me." "I know," George replied, "but that's different. That title is about preparing for changes that might happen someday. I'm talking about something more immediate and specific. I'm asking if you would be willing to serve as my principal advisor and partner when I become king, whether that's in 10 years or 50 years. Charlotte set down her papers completely, giving her brother her full attention. This conversation represented everything she had been working towards since receiving her unprecedented title, but it also represented a choice that would define the rest of her life. Accepting George's proposal would mean dedicating herself entirely to supporting his reign, potentially setting aside any independent ambitions or opportunities she might pursue. "Can I ask why you're thinking about this now?" she said. "You're only 13, George. You won't be king for a very long time." George's expression grew serious in a way that reminded Charlotte of their father when he was grappling with particularly weighty decisions. "Because I want to start preparing for that partnership now, while we're both young enough to grow into it naturally. I want us to learn together, to understand each other's strengths and perspectives so that by the time I actually become king, we'll be an effective team. The maturity of his thinking impressed Charlotte, but it also highlighted the extraordinary pressures that came with being heir to the throne. At 13, George was already thinking decades into the future, planning for responsibilities that most adults couldn't comprehend. It was a reminder of why the monarchy needed to evolve, why King Charles had been right to create new roles and partnerships that could support the enormous burden of modern royal leadership. What would this partnership look like? Charlotte asked. How would it be different from what we're already doing? More formal preparation, George explained, pulling out a notebook where he had apparently been developing his ideas. Joint training in constitutional law, international relations, and statecraft. Shared briefings on major issues affecting the Commonwealth. Regular consultations with Grandpa and Papa about how we can work together most effectively. He paused, then added with a slight smile, plus, I think having a sister as my closest advisor would help me stay grounded. You've never been afraid to tell me when I'm being an idiot. Charlotte laughed despite the seriousness of the conversation. It was true, she had always felt comfortable challenging George's assumptions and offering alternative perspectives, even when protocol might have suggested deference to his position as heir. There's something else, George continued, his expression growing even more serious. I've been watching how you've handled the Young Scholars Network, especially during the crisis last year. You didn't just manage that situation, you turned it into an opportunity to create something better and stronger. That's exactly the kind of thinking the monarchy needs. Charlotte felt a flush of pride at her brother's recognition, but also a growing sense of the magnitude of what he was proposing. George, if I accepted this role, it would mean that my entire life would be structured around supporting your reign. I would need to consider how every decision I make, every cause I support, every relationship I form, would affect our partnership and the monarchy as a whole. I understand that, George said quietly. And I wouldn't ask it of you if I didn't believe you were the right person for it. But, Charlotte, I also think this partnership could give you opportunities to influence policy and create change in ways that wouldn't be possible if you were working independently. It was a compelling argument, and Charlotte could see the potential benefits of the arrangement George was describing. As Princess Royal working in formal partnership with the future king, she would have access to information, resources, and decision-making processes that could amplify the impact of her advocacy work exponentially. But she could also see the risks. Binding herself so closely to George's future reign would limit her independence and potentially make her a target for any criticism directed at his decisions. It would also mean accepting that her own ambitions and interests would always be secondary to supporting his leadership. I need time to think about this, Charlotte said finally. And I think we should discuss it with our parents and Grandpa before making any decisions. This kind of partnership would be unprecedented, and it would need approval from the highest levels of the royal household. George nodded, having anticipated this response. I've already spoken with Papa about it informally. He thinks it's worth exploring, but he agrees that it needs careful consideration and proper consultation with constitutional experts. Over the following weeks, Charlotte found herself in a series of extraordinary conversations with family members, advisors, and constitutional scholars about George's proposal. The discussions revealed both the potential benefits and the serious challenges of the partnership he envisioned. King Charles was intrigued by the idea, seeing it as a natural evolution of the collaborative approach he had been trying to foster within the royal family. The monarchy has always been strongest when siblings work together effectively, he told Charlotte during one of their regular walks through the gardens at Highgrove. Think of Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret in their youth, or Edward VII and his brothers during the late Victorian era. The difference is that George is proposing a much more formal and intentional partnership than previous generations have attempted. Prince William was more cautious, concerned about the pressure such a role would place on Charlotte and the potential for conflict if the siblings disagreed about important issues. You're both still very young, he reminded them during a family meeting. Your perspectives and priorities may change significantly as you mature. Are you prepared for the possibility that this partnership might become difficult or even impossible to maintain? Catherine approached the question from a different angle, focusing on Charlotte's personal development and future happiness. Sweetheart, she said during a private conversation with her daughter, I want to make sure you're not agreeing to this because you feel obligated or because you think it's what's expected of you. This decision should be based on what you genuinely want for your life and where you believe you can make the greatest contribution. The most illuminating conversation came with Queen Camilla, who had navigated her own complex path into the royal family and understood the challenges of defining unconventional roles within traditional structures. Charlotte, she said as they sat together in her private sitting room at Clarence House, the question isn't whether you would be good at this role, we all know you would be exceptional. The question is whether this role would allow you to be your authentic self while serving the institution effectively. It was a perspective Charlotte hadn't fully considered, and it led her to spend considerable time reflecting on her own values, ambitions, and vision for her future. She realized that what attracted her most about George's proposal wasn't the prestige or influence it would offer, but the opportunity to help build a monarchy that was more responsive, more collaborative, and more connected to the needs of ordinary people. The decision crystallized for Charlotte during a video call with Nalani, her friend and collaborator from South Africa who had become one of her most trusted advisors on issues affecting young people. When Charlotte explained George's proposal and her uncertainty about how to respond, Nalani's reaction was immediate and clear. Princess Charlotte, Nalani said, you've already been preparing for this role your entire life. Everything you've done with the Young Scholars Network, all the advocacy work you've been developing, the relationships you've built with young people around the world, it's all been leading toward exactly this kind of opportunity to influence policy at the highest levels. Nalani paused, then added with a smile, besides, from everything you've told me about Prince George, he's going to need someone like you to keep him connected to what's actually happening in the real world. The comment made Charlotte laugh, but it also helped her recognize something important about the partnership George was proposing. It wasn't just about her supporting his leadership, it was about bringing different perspectives and experiences together to create more effective governance. Charlotte made her decision on a quiet Sunday morning in December, exactly 1 month after George had first raised the possibility of their formal partnership. She found her brother in the library at Windsor Castle, reading a biography of King George VI, their great-great-grandfather who had never expected to become king but had risen to meet extraordinary challenges during World War II. I've been thinking about your proposal, Charlotte said, settling into the chair across from where George was sitting. And I have some conditions. George looked up from his book with immediate attention. What kind of conditions? First, Charlotte said, this partnership has to be based on equality, not hierarchy. Yes, you'll be king someday, but within our working relationship, we need to be able to challenge each other's ideas and disagree when necessary without it affecting our ability to work together. George nodded thoughtfully. I agree completely. I don't want an advisor who just tells me what I want to hear. Second, Charlotte continued, I want to maintain some independence in choosing the causes I support and the projects I develop. I'll always consider how my work affects our partnership and the monarchy, but I don't want to lose my own voice or vision in the process of supporting yours. That makes sense, George said. Actually, I think having distinct areas of expertise and interest would make our partnership stronger, not weaker. And, third, Charlotte said, we need to establish clear communication protocols and regular review processes to make sure this partnership is working for both of us. If either of us ever feels that the arrangement isn't serving us well, we need to be able to discuss changes or even end the formal partnership without damaging our relationship as siblings. George smiled at this final condition. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had to, Charlotte replied. This decision affects the rest of my life, George. I needed to make sure I was choosing it for the right reasons and with realistic expectations about what it would entail. "So?" George asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "So yes," Charlotte said, extending her hand for a formal handshake. "I accept your proposal. Princess Charlotte, future advisor to King George VII, at your service." The handshake that followed was witnessed only by the portraits of their ancestors that lined the library walls, but it represented a moment of fundamental importance in the evolution of the British monarchy. Two young people had just committed to a partnership that would reshape royal leadership for decades to come. The formal announcement of their intention to work together was made 6 months later, on Charlotte's 13th birthday. The statement, released jointly by Kensington Palace and approved by King Charles, described their partnership as an innovative approach to preparing for future royal leadership that honors both tradition and the changing needs of modern governance. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with constitutional experts praising the siblings for their maturity and forward-thinking approach to royal service. International media highlighted the partnership as evidence of the British monarchy's ability to adapt and evolve while maintaining its essential character and values. But, for Charlotte, the most meaningful response came from the students participating in the Commonwealth Young Scholars Network, who sent a collective video message congratulating her on her new role and expressing excitement about how her expanded influence might benefit young people around the world. "Princess Charlotte," said a student representative from Canada, speaking for participants from 37 countries, "we know that this new partnership will help you advocate for young people at the highest levels of government. We're proud to be part of your network, and we're excited to see how you'll use your new role to make positive changes for students everywhere." As Charlotte watched the video message in her study at Windsor Castle, surrounded by briefing papers about upcoming royal engagements and policy proposals from various Commonwealth nations, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the path she had chosen. She was no longer just Princess Royal of the future, she was an active partner in shaping that future, working alongside her brother to prepare for leadership roles that would define the monarchy for generations to come. The journey that had begun with her grandfather's unprecedented decision to create a new title for her had evolved into something even more significant, a fundamental reimagining of how royal siblings could work together to serve their nation and the Commonwealth. The challenges ahead would be enormous, but Charlotte felt ready to meet them with the wisdom she had gained, the partnerships she had built, and the unwavering support of a brother who trusted her judgment and valued her perspective. Together, they would prove that the monarchy could indeed evolve to meet the needs of a changing world while maintaining the values and traditions that had served it well for over 1,000 years. As the sun set over Windsor Castle that evening, Charlotte made one final entry in the journal that had documented her journey from curious 9-year-old to confident partner in royal leadership. "Today marks not an ending but a beginning. Everything I have learned, every challenge I have faced, every relationship I have built has prepared me for the work that lies ahead. I am ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to help build a future worthy of the trust that has been placed in me."